Okay, so we mentioned this last week that we kind of decided in the middle of the service that we're going to spend a little bit of time every week talking about the artwork that's used for the graphic. So this week we're going to be starting with the real kind of diving into Jesus' parables, what he's talking about. And so we're going to begin with reflection before we even hear the parable for tonight. We're going to begin with reflection on this image. So if you saw the Facebook event, this is our image for this week. So we're going to start with some group conversation. And I know what you're thinking. You're coloring. There's really important things going on your table. You guys are really busy, but you might want to put the crayons down for like a second. I know. Tough crowd. You guys have to talk. I know. Coloring is great. But we're just going to spend a few minutes kind of in your groups. Maybe if you're not sitting near people, just move towards them. Make a little group. Talk about just simple thoughts, reactions, feelings, anything that provokes thought in your head about this artwork. So 3 to 5 minutes. Go.
I see a rock. I don't see a face. Can't tell who it is. He's got it's a man's gate.
Waylon, join us. What's your thoughts on the...
Oh, I see a little bit of nose. On this one, I see a little bit of nose.
What's your thoughts on this faceless guy with the rock?
See, that's how I draw. So I can't draw nose.
Yes.
Think about it. I like the way you guys talk. Something one way or the other, we all work together. Regardless of what our specific skill set might be, trade each other for whatever our or our whatever. To all have that same
Is that a castle? I'm wondering if that's a castle and these are like the circles.
I thought it looked like a good guard to Arizona.
I can't tell whether that's a well,
This looks like you're like.
well, they're pulling some type of device up there, right?
Yeah, it's a plow.
It's a
It's a plow or a tractor.
yeah.
Kicks the grass up.
It's like he's wearing chocolate.
No, I mean, it looks like the soil's been well worked. He looks pretty happy. The arm is free, you know.
He's putting that bag pretty hard. It's like
It's heavy.
right.
Yeah, but if you see a little bit coming loose, it looks like he's, you know,
Well, he's
a
scattered.
little bit of grain. Yeah. And that, yeah, that light is, oh, is that grass growing up around that rock bag? Yeah, he's probably pretty happy, actually.
You're like, I'm happy that
He looks
like he's working out trying issues right now. Like the way that talks is
my life is becoming new. Maybe I'm
All right.
planting seeds for something new.
Gonna go ahead and bring it back up here. This was good. I was in a conversation, but I heard a lot of other good ideas being shared around the room. I'm going to talk for a minute, so you guys can go back to your coloring now. Win-win. Yeah. Sorry, I kept you from it for probably a little bit too long. So, like I said, I'm going to talk about the artwork a little bit more. So, this particular artwork is not a painting, and we might have said that before, or I might have said that. This is probably some sort of like colored pencil sketch. And this artwork comes from, I'm probably going to butcher this name because it's French, but it's Jean-Francois Millet, who has a rather famous painting called the Sower. So this is not the original. This would have been a sketch, but this is the original. This is the final completion of the painting, and you see he's changed some of the composition and a little bit of the details. And one of the main reasons that we chose this piece this week in particular is because it is a painting of a sower, right? Which is what the parable will be about that we hear in a few minutes. Simple, it's a sower laying seed. And this sower in particular would have existed a little bit later than the sower that we hear in Jesus' parable, or that we will hear in Jesus' parable tonight, because this painting was completed in the early 1850s. And if you can believe it, this painting was incredibly famous and probably more infamous than anything else, as well as many other paintings in this realm. So if anyone is familiar with the movement of realism in art, Millet was one of the most prominent painters in this realism movement. And this movement made waves because of the nature of the subject matter. If we look at this sower, nothing really seems to be going on the surface, right? It almost seems like this artist is painting something so that they would avoid controversy altogether. But in reality, what they're doing is way more dramatic than that. And so a lot of the paintings before this time, which is when we'll look at this, were a lot more dramatic, right? These traditional, this would have been a romanticism piece, very dramatic lighting, dramatic poses, almost like what a photoshopped image would be today. This is what most people painted, right? Unrealistic, realistic looking, but unrealistic in nature, very exaggerated. But then going back to the sower, we see something very real, right? Darker tones, something that's very plain and ordinary, a man throwing seeds. There's no brightening of colors, there's no exaggerated pose, and his face isn't even shown, right? We don't even know the expressions on his face, maybe a little bit with the mouth, but that's it. And so these realist painters wanted to challenge the status quo of the art world, and they wanted people to approach their paintings and become connected to them at a worldly level. And one of the points they were making is a similar point to these parables that we're going to be talking about. You're not merely an observer. They wanted to share the message that you can no longer stand separated or try to escape from this reality that we live in. And Peter Rollins talks around this idea in this way. What is important about Revelation is not that we seek to interpret it in the same way, but rather that we love it and are transformed by it. And going back to art, to fail to recognize this would be similar to an art critic saying that what is important when considering a piece of art is that we interpret it correctly rather than loving it and being challenged by it. Like we said last week quite a few times, context is important. We wouldn't understand the controversial and disturbing nature of this art, and we can't understand the controversial nature of these parables without it. But as we'll continue to see through these coming weeks, we can't stop there, and we have to engage with them and be challenged by them.
changed my mind. So whoever got the reading, let's go ahead and do that first, because I think it'll help for us to hear what the kids have to say about the parable after we hear the parable. Winning. Come on up, Heather.
So, as promised, from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 13, verses 3 to 23. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed, and as he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention.
So, hello. Welcome back. I'm going to share a little bit about what the kids shared. So we've got this structured so that each week they're one ahead of us. So last week they heard the parable of the sower, and they gave their reactions, and they drew about it and talked about it. It's important to note, because we're going to spend time tonight talking about the parable itself, and then Jesus does offer some interpretations. What they based their feedback on was only the parable. They didn't have the interpretations. They didn't have this little passage of bridge in between. So what we got from the kids was this. After hearing that parable that you just heard, we need to surround ourselves with good people, and the shallow soil is taking the easy way out. Profound. Seeds are people. Birds eat the bad people. Thorns are bad people, leading you to be bad. Good people are rich soil. Some Oprah stuff here. These are my favorites. The farmer is Jesus? God? The farmer equals parents? Beautiful, because they're questions. They're not, it's just like, maybe this is what it is. Parents help you if they give you good soil, no pressure. Parents. And then I think we got, do we have, I should turn this on, huh? Yes, there we go. So what does that say? Plant yourself with the right people. So these are the drawings of the feedback. And you sort of see how the parable's playing out. Pretty great. So this is what the kids got just from their initial sort of cursory reading, which is great. We'll do this every week. We'll sort of get their feedback and start to get, what the initial reading is. So kids are great. Thanks again to Sophie for the awesome coloring sheet. We make the joke every summer that you guys, most of this doesn't matter because the focus is on coloring, but it humors me to be able to get to talk about it, so thank you. So I want you to remember, though, that the coloring sheets are actually serving as sort of the overarching metaphor for the parables, that the only way we can get close to a parable is to engage it, to sort of color them in what is otherwise black and white. You can't just say, give me the moral, give me the singular answer, or like the point of the parable. We've been using the phrase coloring, what is going on with this thing? Yeah, coloring the parables with our own experiences. So that's sort of our way of saying we're bringing ourselves into them, we're coloring them in. We have to engage. We've got to talk about it and draw and listen and read and color and imagine and sort of see ourselves in the parable. So the parable tonight is the only parable where Jesus offers what we might call an interpretation, where he says, here's the story, and then here's sort of like what the story means. But, spoiler at the beginning, he doesn't interpret all of it. He actually just opens a few windows, but he goes into very little detail. So it's this, not only is it kind of interpretation that leaves you wanting more, it's almost worse, because you think that you're getting some answers or closure or clarity or meaning, but you're not. It really just sort of deepens the mystery. So we heard the parable, and I intentionally left this off. I'm now going to read to you Jesus' interpretation of the parable. Then Jesus said to them, do you not understand this parable? To which we all say, no, we don't understand this. How then will you understand any parable? So it's almost like, the reason I started with this is because almost like if you don't get it tonight, like maybe just don't bother coming back this summer. Because if you don't get this, you're not going to get any of them. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. But the farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Okay, so here we have basically what's a pretty allegorical engagement in the text. Jesus begins to interpret the parable, if we could call it that, as if he's solving for X. He just sort of starts naming what each variable is. This is this, this is this, this is that. The problem is there are a lot of variables, and he doesn't name all of them. You've got soils and seeds and rocks and sun and farmer and Satan and birds and weeds. There's a lot going on in the story. So he gives us a little bit about what each soil or each type of soil is like. Frustratingly, he does not explain what good soil is or how we get it. He just says some is good. In fact, even with the various kinds of unfruitful soil, he offers only descriptions of them, but not prescriptions. He tells us what they're like, but he offers no help in us avoiding these kinds of troubling soil. But again, this is assuming a lot, right? Is the point of the story to be good soil? Again, we sort of find ourselves looking for the point. What's the moral? But if you read the parable, there's actually only one call to action in the entire parable, and it's very clear. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Excellent. What does that mean? Slow clap. Thanks a lot. Very helpful, Jesus. We appreciate that. But then in between the parable and the interpretation, we have this cryptic rationale for the parables in general. And it, in my mind, makes things even less clear, and hopefully it's as disturbing to you all as it is to me. Jesus says about why he teaches in parables, the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. All right, but those on the outside, he says, I don't think we have the rest of the text. Those on the outside, everything is said in parables so that, and then he's quoting from Isaiah, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven. Right? So the disciples say, why do you teach in parables? He gives them this really cryptic answer. So time out. Does Jesus not want people to understand? I don't think there's much of a chance that Jesus would get hired in a modern church if the pitch was, some of you are going to get it, and then others of you, you're just not going to get it. Does he not want people to turn, to be forgiven, to be healed? Now, for a lot of you, this will make a lot of sense. You go, oh, now I understand what's going on. I've never taken a preaching class, but I have heard from many of my clergy friends what they're like, and I don't think Jesus would pass a preaching class teaching in this style. What is it that someone needs to understand, right? And we're tempted to think then, what is the content that they need to understand? Or how does one come to understand? Is this just an education problem? Is what we need for Jesus to give us a rubric, right, to give us a guide, and then you just apply these sort of 5 simple principles, and then voila, you understand all the parables? Is that what he's after, right? The accumulation of data, understanding in that way. And if some seed falls on good soil, how do we get that? That's a natural question that sort of arises from the parable. He says way more about the bad soil here than he does about the good soil. And it got me thinking this week, Jesus seems to me here to be a little bit of a Calvinist, right? Most of the soil's bad, and it's just kind of stuck that way, and there's some good soil, but neither of them can do anything about it, right? So everybody's just sort of what they are. And I don't think that's what's going on, but it can sort of feel that way on the first read-through. Now, here's in my mind, the most frustrating realization of the whole parable. What Jesus gives that we might call an interpretation is really just an allegory, right? This is that, this is that, this is that. But even in his interpretation, he answers none of these questions that we have. None of the deeper questions that are raised by the parable itself. He doesn't directly answer anything we're asking. And remember from last week, that's how parables work. It's not head-on. It's not direct communication. Instead, it's beside. A parable is to throw something beside. They don't speak messages. Instead, they sort of haunt our experiences. which is why the only way we can get into them is to sort of participate. And I think the deeper listening that whoever has ears, let them hear, I think that's sort of what Jesus is getting at when he says the thing about listening, right? That there's a deeper listening or a deeper understanding, which we'll sort of touch on in a minute. Because I think the most important phrase in the text, and again, when I say most important, I don't mean like the little Orphan Annie secret decoder ring that if you get this phrase, then you can decipher the entire thing and you can unlock the meaning. That's not what I mean. But that's how we want to treat the allegory, right? We're like, oh my gosh, we have this complex problem with all these variables, and Jesus starts telling us what some of the variables are, so then we can solve for X, and then we can figure out the meaning and the understanding, the answer and solution. Instead, what I mean by most important is that I think this phrase actually may help us to rest in the ambiguity. It'll help us to settle in sort of the refusal of the parables to deliver a singular meaning. And the phrase is this: the secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. A few more questions. Is Jesus into secrets? Right? Is this like little insider groups and Letterman jackets and secret societies with rings that do wax seals? Are these little cliques that he's into, like exclusive knowledge, and some people are in the know and the others aren't? Probably not. Probably not. Because not only does Jesus practice a scandalously inclusive communal belonging and meal practice that is open to everyone, he says everyone is a part of this, but he says elsewhere to his followers, what I tell you in secret, I want you to shout from the rooftops. So I don't think it's this like tight little insider-outsider club kind of thing. I think part of the reason we miss the meaning here so often is because of the translation of the word secret. Secret of the kingdom of God. So I want to reframe this word in two ways that I think help us to sort of maybe engage the parable a little bit more rather than standing apart from it. And the first way is this. The word secret is actually, in the Greek, is actually the word mysterion. So, you all are very educated people, what maybe is a better translation than secret? Mystery. Wow, see, you guys could ace seminary. It's really pretty easy. Mystery. Now, I want to help you understand this. So Stacy and I recently started and finished, because we were binging it, a BBC show called Broadchurch. Anybody watched it? Broadchurch fans? Yes, Clarence. Clarence is just every week up the ladder a little bit more. So Broadchurch is this amazing murder mystery, and the entire first season is solving one case. But every episode, they keep adding variables, and they keep adding characters, and they keep sort of throwing in these red herrings to kind of throw you off. Now, if I had started watching the show, and a friend who had watched it came and said, I want to tell you the secret, I would say, stop. No, don't. Don't spoil the show for me. Don't give me the answer. Don't tell me who did it. But if the same friend came to me and said, hey, have you heard of Broadchurch? I said, no. And they said, you should do yourself a favor and watch it. Let me give you the gift of this mystery, of this story, of this show. Does that make a bit more sense? There is a huge difference between being told the secret, singular answer, solved, revealed, resolved, versus being given a mystery, open-ended, unresolved, a story that draws us into the questions rather than answering them, that teases you with variables, one where the only way to encounter it is to experience it. So, for example, if during the first episode someone had spoiled it and they came to me and they told me who the killer was, I would have stopped watching the show, and it would have done very little for me, and it wouldn't have done anything to me. But by the end of the first season, learning in the last episode who the killer was almost entirely inconsequential compared to the experience that I had had watching through the entire season. The tears, the process of putting myself in the shoes of each character, the family who had lost the child, asking all sorts of moral questions about how so many characters had handled themselves, wondering how I would handle myself if I were in that same. This was an experience that I had living through the season of the show. So what I'm saying is, I think what Jesus is after is saying, I want to give you the mystery of the kingdom of God through a story that draws you in, that engages you, that activates you. I want you to enter into it and experience it. It cannot be communicated simply by whispering a secret. It has to be encountered and engaged, and it must be lived. In a sense, there is no spoiler. And this sort of upends the entire modern Christian movement, that there's a secret answer somewhere, and if you go to seminary long enough, you get it. Your life, your happiness, your wholeness are not hidden in a riddle. They are hidden in plain sight. I've said this before. Your spiritual life is your life. This is called non-duality. There isn't this and that, there is this. There is all of this. It is what it is. Your spiritual life is your life. Not to mention, secrets create power dynamics, hierarchies. Someone is in control. And this is actually counter to the entirety of the dynamic that Jesus practices, his ethics of servanthood, right? He says crazy things like the first will be last and the last will be first. The first of all must be the servant of all. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Mystery is egalitarian. It preserves the equality of curiosity. It preserves the mutuality of the pilgrimage that we share. Everyone is trying to figure this thing out together. The point being, everyone should watch Broadchurch. Yeah, it's on Netflix. I think Jesus is saying the kingdom of God is a mystery. You don't apprehend it. You don't get to hold on to it. You can bump up against it. You get little glimpses, little tastes. It really isn't something that's named or defined in theology as much as it is that it's something that we sing about in what we might call theopoetics. It's images and metaphor and allegory and symbol, and some of them stir us more than others, and some of them stir others more than us, and that's okay. It's like art. It's coloring, it's storytelling, all of which point beyond themselves. And they point back into the heart and the soul of the person that are engaging them, at the bottom of which is mystery. At the bottom of which is mystery. Okay, so the word secret, it's mystery. It's not like a little answer that he gives, like, hey, here's the thing you need to know, and if you know it, then you're cool. The second way I want to reframe this word secret, mysterion literally translates to shut the mouth. What's the kingdom of God like? Shut up. Right? But in a sense, what would you say about the kingdom of God, right? What do you think it's like? I don't have anything to say about that. What is God? Who is God? What is the kingdom of God? I don't know. I don't have much to say about it. That's sort of the direction I think this word takes us, is back into the realm of silence. And I think this gets back to the understanding of revelation as concealment, right? So you have this experience of God. You touch the sacred. You are held in the embrace of the divine. You glimpse the good and the beautiful and true. You have a profound experience of resting in the ground of being. You don't first shoot your mouth off about it, right? What's the language we use? I was left speechless. Yeah, we know. We've had these experiences. I think that's what mystery is trying to touch. It's qualitative, not quantitative. It's a depth of being, not something you get to know or don't know. To wrap words around this would be futile. To speak with certainty would be idolatry. It would be the most profound kind of heresy. Not just to speak against the certainty of dogma, but instead to speak with certainty against what is actually most truly mystery. So Pete Rollins sort of tackles this in a cool way in one of his first books, How Not to Speak of God. He says, the revelation of God should be compared to a parable that speaks out of an excess of meaning. This means that the revelation offers a wealth of meaning that we'll be able to speak in different ways to those with ears to hear. So this is sort of a common metaphor now. It's been here for a couple weeks. It's like seeing a piece of art. It does different things to different people. We can always come back to it, and there's a wealth of depth and quality to sort of pull from it over and over and over. He goes on, hence, revelation ought not to be thought of either as that which makes God known or as that which leaves God unknown. I love this line. But rather as the overpowering light that renders God known as unknown. Known as unknown. So these parables, these are stories that help us to know God as the unknown. To know for sure the depth of the unknowable mystery that we call by the name of God. This is the insight of God hidden invisibility. That revelation embraces concealment, and that all our various interpretations, while they're valuable, this is part of it. This is a part of the way that we engage this stuff, but that they're always provisional, and they're always fragile, and they're always fragmentary. They're never complete. That being said, we've gotten this far, and we haven't actually gotten into the provisional and fragile and fragmentary interpretation that Jesus offers, and I'm not going to. I don't want to talk about what he talks about. I'd rather talk about what he doesn't talk about, because for me, that's how I'm drawn to engage the parable. So if I have to play the allegory game with this parable, which I don't, but I'm gonna, this is sort of where I'm landing now. And I've been sitting with this for a while. If I have to play the allegory game, here's where I'm at. I think God is the farmer. I don't have a lot of justification for this. I think the original image in the scriptures is that God plants a garden in the east in Eden. So, okay, fine, God's a farmer. So I think God's the one who's throwing the seed, whatever that is. I think the soil is the human heart. And you find this throughout the prophets, the idea of cultivating and tilling sort of the soil of the human heart. Jeremiah, Isaiah, the text that was connected to what we read, that was quoted in the passage. Jesus says the seed is the word. Great, that's helpful. What the hell is the word? Right? Again, it's like, hey, let me give you what these variables are. And by the way, there's absolutely no clarity about what the thing is that I told you it is. So have fun with that. Exactly. The interpretation is almost like this M.C. Escher painting of the endless stairs, right? It's infuriating. The illusion is that you're headed somewhere, but it's really just ultimately a loop back into the mystery. And this is sort of how we're tempted to engage the parable, is that it starts to get to work in us, and we want to pull it outside of us and go, I think I'm getting what this means. Well, I finally understand it. And all we're doing is we're trying to take it from here, where it's doing work, and hold it at a distance and go, oh, well, I intellectually understand this, right? I've captured what this is and what it's trying to do. No. The staircase continues to lead back within. So maybe the word, who knows, maybe the word is sort of this proclamation that the kingdom of God is within us and all around us, that God is here and everywhere. Maybe it's less specific, right? Maybe it's like the force that holds the universe together, or the engine that's pulling this whole thing forward, or maybe it's just sacred energy, the divine spark. Who knows, right? Jesus doesn't say. We have a lot of stuff throughout the scriptures about the word, but here, Jesus doesn't nod to any of that, right? He says the seed is the word. That's what we get. Super helpful. Great. Okay. And this is interesting to me that the kids even picked up on this. I think there's something important there. Maybe each soil that he's talking about is a condition of the human heart, of receptivity to this word, whatever the word is. And all I want to do is draw just the tiniest little connection that I think leaves this sufficiently vague and mysterious between understanding and fruit. I think for me, that's where some of the real power is in this parable, between understanding and fruit. When Jesus speaks of understanding, right, people understanding these parables, I think baked into that story is this sort of hidden gem about how he understands the word understanding. Right? See, in every case, the soil receives the seed. The farmer does not sow exclusively on good soil. And I think, like what our group talked about, and I think many of you did, is that the picture looked like a barren wasteland, right? Like, why is this guy sowing seeds in the middle of a desert? There's an unconditional sowing of seeds. And if you read the parable, all the different soils, regardless of their quality, however shallow or compromised, they all have this word. Whatever that is, they all get it. Every soil gets that same seed. So we can stretch our imagination, right? If the seed is this word, and if the soil are people, right, or the human heart, we can stretch our imagination to think that, okay, well, each of these soils may have had some sort of cognitive awareness, right? They had received data or ideas or beliefs. And then what we tend to do is we take revelation and render it into an eloquent doctrine, once again, trying to sort of explain things. I don't think this is what Jesus is trying to do. I don't think that's what he's talking about. I think when he says understanding, he's talking about a form of life, a way of living, a way of being, the only evidence of which only evidence of having received the word, the only evidence of understanding is bearing fruit. Right? If there's a subtly implied call to action, is that there's soil and there's seed, and that the good soil bears fruit. So if there's something going on where we're supposed to understand and there should be some benefit, it's connected to bearing fruit. Not an eloquent doctrine, but a beautiful transformation, living in a particular way in the world. So ultimately, I think the mystery given to us in this story is the work of tilling the soil of our own hearts in order to receive or understand or to live the life that is already in each one of us in ways that bear fruit. Manifest love, yield justice, produce mercy and grace and peace. Whatever God is or whatever God gives or whatever God sows is unconditional. All people get it. The seed is sown on every soil. Everyone has it. And so I think if the call to action here is to listen, to hear deeply, to receive in the fullest sense, then maybe in this hearing, right, he who has ears to hear, let him hear, maybe this is speaking about the way that we begin to till ourselves toward good soil. Maybe it's as simple as shutting the mouth, learning to rest a bit more in mystery, opening ourselves somehow to receive more deeply. And I think this speaks to, I've described this before, I think, as a double-sided table, right? The Eucharist, the good gift. The gift is unconditional, right? It's not currency that's trying to get you to do something else. On the flip side, I don't think that the Eucharist is something that we can ever only receive. I think instead it symbolizes the seed of goodness, the seed of grace that is planted in us. And so to only receive it, to only consume it, for it to remain inactive, I think is not to receive it at all. And the imagery is powerful. The seed has to disappear in order to produce fruit. The Eucharist must disappear. We consume it. It's planted in each of us, and it must be embodied as love in our lives. That's how the fruit is born. The seed is only fruitful if it is manifest, if it's embodied in the community, gathered and brought forth from the soil of our hearts into vital, material living. Not the list of things you believe or don't believe, but how is it and who is it that we are? As a community who embodies welcome and grace and love, these things that we hope over and over and over are being sown into our hearts communally, individually. Tonight, in the spirit of mystery, the one that draws us towards silence, to the shutting of the mouth and listening, we are going to take the Eucharist silently. No music during it tonight. I think that word mysterion hopefully will sort of settle with us. As we ask some of those questions and then we're reminded the beginning of the answer is to shut the mouth. We don't need more words and we don't need more music and we don't need more content. What we need is a call back to silence, to the gift of speechlessness. And so as always, this table has been set for us and all people, and no one will ever be turned away. If you'd like, feel free to come and grab a piece of bread.